the young people, there's 50 kids here. That's unbelievable. Well, I mean, it's believable, but that's fascinating. Yeah. I'm not sure if they're still here, but we have two couples that were joining us today from California. They moved here from California. They may have left, but they said 7 more families are following them. Pardon me? Well, they didn't necessarily say they were coming here, but they. Laura.
They will come.
Yeah. So, all right. Let's see. I need to change mics. I've got it. I've got some.
You have coffee already?
I was desperate a moment ago. Can I get that?
So you're drinking my coffee? Hey, Jonathan, can you turn on the wired mic?
There it is. There it is. Okay, very good. Oh, well, let me get situated here. All right. I just want to once again, and I want to do it while they're not here so they don't think I'm patronizing them. I want to thank the young people that helped us out this morning with the music, and just really encouraged that there's so many young folks that want to be involved. You can't hear me? Jonathan, can you take the effects? Take the effects off of this microphone, please. Can you do that? Yeah, what was that commercial? Hey, good looking, I'll be over later, right? You remember that commercial?
Now you can't do it all. Now you're gone. It's off.
All right, the effects are off, but so is the microphone. Do you know what's being posted right now? We can't hear sound. All right. So now you never saw that commercial? Do it again. Chris Clark, you know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. We're old. You're being bad. All right, so I'm being asked, what's this design on this shirt mean? You know, well, it means I got stripes around my shoulders. Anyway, we better get serious here. Lord, I apologize. Anyway, does anybody have anything constructive and spiritual to add to this conversation this afternoon? Anybody want to get us started? Nate's standing up and got his Bible in his hand. Does that mean anything? All right. Well, we'll start with Nate, even if he wasn't ready.
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Let me get the Exodus here. Exodus is in the Old Testament, right?
Last time I looked, which was about an hour and a half ago, yes.
All right, so I was just reading through the beginning of the chapter in Hebrew, and I found it interesting that the word for descendants and the word for persons there is, the first word descendants is kol nefesh. And the word for persons is nefesh there, so which is soul or mind. So that just confirms to me, I know we already all know that it's not about a bloodline totally. The bloodline is listed there, but it was also all those who were of the same mind and the same heart as him.
Which actually, not to cut you off. Oh, you were done. There are some extracurricular writings that say that there was 70 souls that came from him, but there were others that came with them as well that were of the same mind, if you will, kind of connecting to that thought. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, the word nephesh, it's more than just, it's not the outer, it's the inner. It's referring to the most important part of us. It's the same word when God breathed the breath of life into Adam and he became a living soul, a living nephesh. So that's that vitality, that life force. So yes. All right, anyone else want to kind of share with us? Yes, Candace. Well, you got to talk in the microphone. Candace, you have a new hairdo today, don't you? Slightly different?
Well, it's the same haircut. I haven't cut my hair anymore. I just
Okay, well, it looks.
styled it.
Okay. You styled it differently then.
Yeah.
It looks very becoming. May I
Well,
say that
thank
to
you. Very nice thing for you to say. Okay, I have a slew of things here.
Okay, well, you're limited to 2.
Really?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm cutting up with you.
Okay. It said in Exodus 3:12 that Moses brought the children of Israel God told Moses he was going to bring him back to that same mountain. That's where he brought the children of Israel. Is that where they gave the Torah?
What, you mean when they came to Mount Sinai?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so that got me on a search.
All right.
Okay, because Galatians 4:21-31 talks about Sinai, and he calls it equaled Hagar in bondage, but also and it was talking about the Torah, I guess, meaning if you're just trying to do the Torah to be saved, that's just bondage. But if you're having faith, which comes from Jerusalem from above, which equals God's people and freedom, then and you're doing the Torah and having faith in Messiah, because you have to have faith first. You have to believe in what Yeshua did to be saved.
Okay.
And then once you're saved, you go on to obedience, which would be keeping Torah. So I was kind of cross-referencing it with Galatians in that way. And then God told Moses in Exodus 3:5 to remove his sandals because he was on holy ground. And I understand it was because he's on holy ground. But why? I mean, I come to church and I don't remove my shoes because this is where we come to worship God.
Okay. So you're asking why it was considered a holy ground or why he removed his shoes?
I'm just not understanding it. I mean, and I know that God has a right to tell us to take our shoes off. We're walking on holy ground, but I'm not understanding. There's got to be some kind of concept there.
Well, the first thing I would say is the ground was holy, not because of necessarily where it was, but because of who was there. All right. His presence made it holy. His presence made it set apart. It's like the sanctuary, whether it was in the wilderness or whether it was the temple on the top of Mount Moriah. It wasn't holy just because it was. It was holy because that was where his presence resided. So when his presence was no longer there, what happened to the tabernacle at Shiloh? When his presence was no longer there, what happened to the temple that Solomon built? What happened to the temple that Herod, expanded upon? When his presence is not there, it's just a building. It's just a piece of ground. If his presence is there, it makes it holy. So that's how I see it. He's the one who sanctifies it. It's like, Messiah was talking about, and my mind it's in the Gospels where he talks about, don't swear by the altar, don't swear by the gold, these kinds of things. It's not those things that sanctifies. It's the one whose presence resides there. And I'm paraphrasing it. So as far as the ground being holy, that's what convinces me why he says that.
And I understand that part, But like when the priest went in to minister to Yahweh, and like when he went into the Holy of Holies, I don't see any requirement of them having to take off their shoes. That's why it would just kind of threw me because.
Well,
of the shoes? I mean, what is it about the shoes? Because
actually, there were, and there was something. If oh, come on, Bill. There were those situations the priests were in that they didn't wear shoes.
Okay.
I'm having a hard time remembering where references are right now. I will tell you, as far as the whole shoe thing and taking it off, I'll tell you what some of the things that Judaism says about it, and it's depending on the tradition, I guess you'd say. I don't know that I agree with this, okay? But anything that is made with cow leather that is used, in a holy setting, they make it to be some connection with the golden calf. That's like you don't blow a ram's horn. You don't blow an ox's horn. You don't blow a bull's horn. You blow a ram's horn. The one comes from the ram or a kudu, because the bull horn or the ox horn has connection, at least, thematically, it has connection with the whole golden calf. So I'll tell you that in some situations they make that connection. Whether or not that's the Creator's requirement, I don't know, or has anything to do with it. This preceded all of that. So you would think, well, what would that have to do with it? But beyond that, I don't know that I have the answer as to why people were to take their shoes off. I would just say it's holy because he's there. Yeah. Hold on, I think we have some comments on this. So pass the mic back. We'll come back to you because maybe we've got some folks that can shed some light on it better than I.
I seriously doubt that, but I kind of have a question. The Lord appeared during those times a little differently than now. The Holy Spirit is within us now.
Okay.
Back then, the Lord often appeared, and perhaps we don't know what holy ground is in this day, at least. I've never been told to take my shoes off.
Right.
So is it possible it's because of the way he appeared then?
I don't know. I, like you, have never had the Creator encounter me in a bush. Chris wanted to comment on this too, and I hadn't forgotten you had some other things. You didn't? Not on this. Okay.
I've got one thing.
Okay. What is your thought on this?
Well, because I've looked into this, and the thing is when we look at Exodus 28, verses 1 through 43, and then in 39, 1 through 31, that's where we get the details of how the priests were to dress when they go into the tabernacle, when they go into the Holy of Holies. And it does not mention shoes or footwear.
Right.
Which would tend to indicate there was none. So that may be the answer, is they don't say to take them off because they weren't supposed to be wearing them if that's where they were working. So
Well, right. Well, that's
still kind of
you don't know that we don't know
it's gray. It's
the
not.
reason
Yeah.
behind it, and which is what she's asking, and I don't know that I have the answer. But I knew that there was indications in the scripture that the priest in situations were not to wear shoes. I don't know that I understand why. Like I said, the best I've could offer in that regard is what I've heard Judaism say, but I don't know that I go along with it.
well, a thought that came to my mind is with shoes, you walk all over everywhere, and sometimes you walk on excrement. Maybe it's because his shoes were dirty and common, and God is not common.
Well, he is a shepherd.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and God is not common.
That might be something just as practical as that. So, see, you answered your own question.
Well, maybe so.
It might be the very reason. Good point.
And then on Pharaoh in Exodus 5:17 through 18, and Pharaoh, he tended to twist the situation around like he's increased their burden on the children of Israel. And he twisted it around. You're crying out to God. you don't have enough work to do, so he twisted it around to make it look really bad. And I think it's like, I think about the world we live in today, and when I was working on a job, I would notice how they would increase our workload, never give us extra time, and they would also not increase our pay. They would just expect you to put out more, and it was very stressful. And I remember this when I worked in a call center. It was very, very stressful. And a lot of people had nervous breakdowns because it was so, they were putting, it was just putting so much on people. And I see that we have a situation today in our world where we are, like you said, we're in the birth canal and God is trying to squeeze us out. And, and the only way he's going to get us to cry out for him to come back is to make it so miserable that we can't stand it here anymore. Maybe we're still too comfortable here in America, But I see from the way things are going on that if they continue and if they succeed, if the Democrats succeed in what they're wanting to do and bring socialism totally to America, that they're gonna, I see a time when our Bibles will be taken from us, our churches will be shut down, and those who want to live for God are gonna have to make a decision whether they're going to live for God, take the mark, or whatever. And I see that I can see that with the story of the children of Israel in Egypt. And so...
well, let me comment on that. Can I? Mm-hmm. Yeah, those things happened, and those things will happen. And so what we've got to do is see beyond it and see what the Father's purpose in allowing those kinds of things to happen is. For the glory that was set before him, Yeshua endured, the shame of the cross. He had to go through those things, the suffering part of it, but he's looking beyond that to why, the purpose behind it, what comes out of it. And like the story here, all these awful things happen to them. And it's really easy to get lost in that and to lose sight of, if we're focused on the here and the now and the consequence that we find ourselves in, it's easy to get lost in that and lose sight of, but what comes out of this? The pressing and the squeezing is to bring about the transformation in me to be the person that he's called me to be, for us to be the people that he's called us to be. And then as it relates to the things going on in our nation, I agree that there are certain people in this world, and I don't know that they're limited to any one political party, mind you, but there are people in this world who they're not going to stop. They're not going to rest. They're not going to quit. They're not going to... We may be experiencing a little bit of a respite right now. Okay? I don't know how long that's going to continue, but eventually those same people, if they go down, there'll be somebody right behind them. They're going to press this because the adversary is never going to rest. He's never going to give up. He's always going to be aggressive until he's locked in that pit. So this is a fight that we're in for the long haul. But in the end, it brings about a positive transformation in us if we'll allow the Father to work in us through all these things and keep our eye on the goal, the objective. Anyway, so
absolutely. I mean, the children of Israel, the more that they were persecuted, the more they grew. And I see that as persecution heats up in America, and it will get worse, it will cause us to turn to God more. It will cause us to cry out to him for more, because he will be our only source and our only strength.
Well, it'll be one or the other. We'll cry out to him, or we'll
succeed
or
to the
we'll
other side.
blame him.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Unfortunately, can be that.
And one more thing. Hi, Matthew.
That's fine. All right, anyone else want to chime in? All right, Chris.
We found a lot of nuggets last night as we were going through this portion that made us have to stop and think a little bit, scratch our heads, kind of take notice of what the text might be alluding to. The start of it began in chapter 2, just starting to see some of the connections to where Messiah can be seen or have to be drawn out per se, because our scriptures are written on paper. Paper comes from pulp. In the sense of where Moses was placed, he was placed amongst the
reeds.
The papyrus reeds, which would have been used to make the paper then. So he was hidden amongst that which would have been used to write upon, in the same sense that Yeshua can be drawn out of the pages today if we read into it to find him there. So it's kind of
right. What does Moshe mean?
To draw out.
To draw out.
Yes.
Right.
So we were looking at that, and then began to notice that, of course, he's raised from a Levitical priesthood, from a home of two parents in that sense. And it struck us odd that Pharaoh's daughter is bathing in the Nile and comes across this basket and takes this Hebrew boy to be her own because of the commandment that her father had given to kill all the Hebrew boys. And we began to discuss this, and some of the things that were discussed were that in the Egyptian culture, this is tying into the plagues that will come later on, that she perhaps was going to worship the god of the Nile, the god of the water there. And perhaps maybe she had been even praying for a baby from this god. And the sense that this child shows up and answers a prayer, you wouldn't throw it back in to refute the god of the Nile, you would defile daddy in the sense. And so daddy allows this child to come into her home because the god of the Nile has gifted her with this. That was a thought. I'll get your intake on that in a moment. But, we heard you talk about before that this is the second time of two that this ark is mentioned. We have Noah's ark, and then we have Moses being in this smaller ark, per se, this Teva?
Yes, Teva.
And that it refers to those that are in it are going to be saved, in the sense that those that were in Noah's ark were the ones that received salvation. Everyone outside of that didn't. In the same sense here, Moses is saved because of being placed in this ark, covered in atonement, pitch in this sense, same as the Noah's ark was. And then that he is found, but it's a resurrection per se, because in Egyptian culture, those boxes or rafts that they would have put onto the Nile or onto the water would have been a representation of a funeral. And so this could have been viewed that it was a funeral that she came across, but there was a resurrection purpose to take place with it, just as in Yeshua that there was a resurrection purpose upon him being found and so forth in that regard. Another thing that we found that was very interesting was when he spoke to God at the burning bush, and God announces who he is.
I have no idea what that was.
I'll take Moses for 200 then.
Oh, I like that one. I like that. That's good.
That when God spoke to him at the burning bush, he announced to him that he was the God of his father, then the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I believe that was perhaps to draw upon what he had spent those few years growing up in that home, learning about what his dad would have shared with him, and knowing who this God was that was going to eventually speak to him and draw him into this calling, which then leads to the problem that shows up in chapter 4 with Zipporah. And right in the middle of, hey, you're my guy, I've called you to go and save Israel, and now I'm going to kill you. Mm-hmm. And Zipporah gets really frustrated with this and cuts off does the circumcision and throws it at Moses's area, per se.
Like how you dealt with that, Chris.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
As a reflection, though, of Moses wasn't doing what he knew he should have been doing and had learned growing up, that was a requirement of circumcising his son before the father, and yet the father is calling him to go and circumcise Israel out of Egypt. So there's a lot in there to unpack and comment upon, so you can choose.
Well, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of oral tradition as it relates to Moses and all the things that were going on at the time. And How much of it is accurate, how much of it isn't, I don't know. But there are a couple things I will comment on there. The connection between the ark, you already pointed that out, but the connection between the Messiah and Moses is very interesting too. Even Moshe is Mem Shin He. I don't have a tablet to show everybody today, but it's Mem Shin He, Moshe, and it comes from Masha. It means you draw out of something, all right? In this particular case, you drew out of the water. But it's that root, Masha, is phonetically equivalent to Mashach. And Mashach is to smear something with oil. And from that, we get Mashiach, Messiah. So, this basket, this ark that was made out of the reed grass, as you already talked about, that's papyrus, and we go from that to, actually, we end up with the word Bible. I mean, that's the etymology of the word Bible is related to the reed grass that the ark was made out of, that Moses was actually hidden in. So he was kind of, if you will, if you can see this, he was hidden in the word. Well, who was hidden in the word? The Messiah is hidden in the word. And I'm deviating just a little bit. I'll come back because I'm running around Mount Sinai, right? I've got the mug that says so right here. There you go. See, I ran around Mount Sinai, I got lost. Where was... But all these connections between the Messiah and how, he's hidden in the Word, and, so he's drawn out. And who's discovering him? He's kind of put away from his people, and who discovers him? This woman who's, if all of these oral traditions are correct, is going down to worship another God. And in the process of worshiping another God, she comes across something that is in the picture that's being painted, is going to save her from all of those other gods, as it were. So there's a lot of different things about this story. Boy, I wish we had a lot of time to go into all of it. I've always been perplexed by the whole circumcision thing, but you just brought something out that connected with me. He is being introduced to the God of his father, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Because, why? He grew up in whose house? He grew up in the house of the man that was trying to kill him, which I've always found kind of almost comical, that he grew up in the house of the man that was trying to kill him, and his biological mother nursed him and got paid by the man who was trying to kill him. And he grows up in this house, but he's introduced to the God of his father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so then, like you said, he should have known certain things. And it's ironic that he is going to a people to redeem or to be used in this redemptive process of bringing them out. And yet his wife, a Midianite, is having to kind of set him straight on, you better get your house in order first before you go try to take care of all this down there. So that's kind of interesting. The only other thing that jumps out at me there is, well, not that it jumps out at me, that you said that I'm not that familiar with, is how the Nile god may have factored into this. And it's interesting to me that, let's say that's true, and I don't know. All right, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, let's say that that's what was going on. It kind of demonstrates to me just how adamant the Father is to carry out his plan. And he'll use what people are familiar with, what they know, even though it's wrong, he'll use those kinds of people to bring about his purposes. It's apples and oranges perhaps, but I'm thinking about Paul going up to Mars Hill. You got all these this pantheon of gods, and he's listening to these, Athenians talk, and they're philosophizing, and they're pontificating, and all these kinds of things. And he says, I perceive that you guys like to talk. You like to talk about all these different things. And I notice you got all these different gods. And he said, I saw over here that you've got one dedicated to the unknown God. And so let me tell you about him. So he didn't go over there and yank it down and break it into 1,000 pieces. He took what they knew and understood as a launching pad to tell them about things they didn't know but needed to. So if you understand what I just said there, that's what was going on in my mind when you were talking about if she was going down to worship this other God, and if that's what was happening, and if she's perceiving this as an answer. The Creator is using not to condone it, to endorse it, but he's using that to bring about his purpose. Did that make sense? And I want to make very, very sure everybody understands. I'm not saying that he waters down his truth or compromises. I'm just saying that, well, the adversary serves his purposes. The adversary served his purpose when Job was being attacked and he was going through that trial. He allows the adversary to do certain things, but in the end, he ends up serving his purpose. Pharaoh was an evil man, but yet the Creator used Pharaoh to bring about a righteous purpose. Anyway, I'll stop there. But there's a lot more to the whole Moses-Messiah connection, too. Anyway, who's next?
Bill, it seems like Moses' identity and his calling in life might be tied in with this whole concept of circumcision. When they found him in the basket, they looked down and said, "Oh, it's a Hebrew boy." And they probably looked down and said, "Oh, he's been circumcised." So even from the beginning, and yet he was raised as an Egyptian. So when he went to Midian, they said, "Oh, an Egyptian saved us." So his identity, his outside appearance, his dress, everything would have seemed Egyptian at that time. So his education in Pharaoh's house would have been Egyptian. So all that comes full circle when he's coming back into the land and he is avoiding the thought of circumcising his children. He's probably a little bit perplexed in what the identity and the necessity of that would be. And yet his wife knew how important that was because that's the way he was raised, and it's something that no one on the outside would have known, but knowing him intimately, knowing what his purpose and calling is, it's tied back in.
So let's compare that then to Joseph, who goes down into Egypt, and he looks the part, he looks the Egyptian, but he's still identifying, I think anyway, he's still identifying as the seed of Abraham. He knows who he is, And so on the other end, you've got Moses coming out of that, and, he's somewhat identifying as the Egyptian and has to be reminded, nope, you're the seed of Abraham. Yeah, interesting. And so, extrapolate that out to, include you and me. How we identify. People are identifying everything as everything these days. Just because they want to. But we've been raised in Egypt. That's been our identity. But now we're coming into that time and the place we need to understand that our identity is as his and part of this family of faith. And so the circumcision aspect of it, in my view anyway, it plays it this way. I'm not speaking against, the physical circumcision, but who is circumcised? That one who may not be circumcised in the flesh and yet circumcised in his heart, that counts for circumcision, Paul says. So if we are in Egypt, and this is where I'm going with this, if we're in Egypt, if we're coming into that time and Pharaoh's rising up and all these different things are being set in place to bring oppression and affliction and those kinds of things, it is high time for us to have a circumcision of the heart, and not press the Creator. Let me see, how does it read here? And it came to pass on the way at the lodging place that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. I don't want to get into that scenario, I want to just go ahead and have, the condition of my heart be to do what he's calling me to do now. But that is an interesting thing to consider. His identity is tied to the idea of circumcision from the very beginning, how he was identified by the Egyptians. and then how he's letting himself be identified to others. Very interesting. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, my
Oh,
question.
wait a minute. Hold on. No shirt questions.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm
Shoes
sorry.
you got on.
Nondescript.
My question is going along with what Patrick said as far as what Moses actually looked like, who he identified as. You know, he went from being 3 months old to a grown man killing an Egyptian taskmaster in just a few sentences here. It doesn't really give a lot of in between. And, you know, we were talking about it last night. Did Pharaoh, when Moses was growing up in the palace, did Pharaoh even pay attention to Moses? Did he really know about him? Did he think he was a Hebrew child, or what did he think about that? And at what point did Moses realize that he was going to go out to his brethren, the Hebrews, to protect them? What did he think he was?
Well, you know, there are some other writings, you know, that speak to the issue. And what I've always gathered from it is the notion that the Egyptians, or at least some, knew exactly who he was, where he came from, and all those kinds of things. I mean, the daughter of Pharaoh certainly did. But because she brought him into their household, they raised him as an Egyptian and just assumed that that's what he was going to take. That was the mantle that he was going to take upon himself. He was going to live and function as an Egyptian. What he thought, how he looked at it, I mean, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that he, at some point in time anyway, or for some point in time, he embraced that identity too. You know, what was the thing that changed it all? As far as the biblical record, all we've got to go on is he's out walking one day amongst his people and seeing the oppression that they're living under, and then sees this Egyptian taskmaster, and that's what prompts him to do what he did. Other than that, I don't really know. I could speculate, and I'll insert my own feelings into this if I can. All right? That doesn't mean that this is the way it happened, but just trying to think it through. I knew where I came from in the sense I knew who my father was, but he didn't know where he came from. And so even though he identified as a cloud, because those are the people that took him in and raised him, he had this, at some point in time, in growing up, he had this desire to know where he came from. He went out investigating. He wanted to know. He had a curiosity about it. And not immediately, and after a lot of false starts, he eventually came to embrace who he really was and where he come from, as he got to go, and see these people and meet these people and be, to some degree received by these people. So, I don't know. The Bible doesn't really tell us. I can only imagine that someone who knows that if he's circumcised, he knows it, and he knows who, he knows where that, or who that identifies with. So I can only imagine that at some point he just became curious about it. If he's raised as a prince of Egypt, he certainly has access to go out and to check into these things. But again, the biblical record just tells us that, he's going out among his people. He's seeing the oppression they're living under. Something was moved in him, and he took action, which kind of forced the issue. When he killed that Egyptian, and Pharaoh, is looking for him now, it kind of forces, the decision to be made. Who am I going to identify with? Because I've kind of cut myself off from Pharaoh.
Now, you said he was the prince. He was
adopted that's how he
nephew.
was, traditionally, that's how he was viewed. He was a prince of Egypt.
Right.
Yes.
Which meant he had some clout in Egypt at that time. Question came up last night. If he took matters upon himself to deal with the taskmaster that was torturing someone, did he not maybe have enough clout to where he didn't have to run for his life? He could simply say, hey, this guy was doing so-and-so, and I stopped him, instead of running to show that he was not one of the Egyptians.
Well, I think it would be logical to assume that, but there must be something else going on that we don't know about, because as soon as he kills him, he's got to figure out how to hide this from Pharaoh. And then when Pharaoh finds out, when it's brought to his attention, and by the way, who sold him out? His own people. All right. So obviously something's been going on in the story that we're not made aware of. But you would think he would have that kind of clout, but just by his own words and how he responds to it, apparently he does not. Or apparently by taking the life of an Egyptian, being who he really is, maybe that has something to do with it as well. But beyond that, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting to ponder all these things, but sometimes we're left to speculate. All right. Jenna's down here. While you move over to Jenna, unless somebody else was next. Somebody was asking from the live stream, can you explain Exodus 24, 24, and 26? And that's just basically what we've already spoken about when Moses is headed back to Egypt and the Lord was waiting to kill him. And then Zipporah took a flint and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at him. A flint. Whoa. Anyway. Yes, Jen.
I was reading through how when Moses was said, "Oh, I can't talk," I'm slow of speech and all that, and how God gave him two signs. One of them was to make a snake from the rod, and the other one was the thing of leprosy. He put it to his bosom, and it came out. The snake was obvious because he did that in front of Pharaoh. But as I was reading through it, it kind of hit me, that Miriam was the only person that I read, and I could be wrong, that actually got leprosy. And he says if these people don't believe you, then they can come down with leprosy. And Miriam was the only one. And I used to think that she got leprosy because she was complaining. But maybe it was a little more deeper than that. Maybe it was more like she didn't believe him. There was doubt arose from what other people may have been saying that caused her to doubt. Well, why does he get to be the only one? Why is from Korah? That could have been. The other thing is the commentaries in the bottom of the Chumash was talking about the midwives and how they wouldn't murder the Hebrew babies, but then it said that Jochebed was actually a descendant from the people who were that was supposed to murder for the midwives. That Jochebed was from them, and then it just kind of. It's funny how God just does things, And then what I was telling you before about the Haftorah, how that it completely went along with what you were saying on page 1147 of the Haftorah, whatever that passage was for, that was completely right on, dead on what you were saying earlier. So,
Well, let's take them one at a time. As far as the two signs that were given to Moses, Moses needs some convincing. Who shall I say sent me? I barely know you, and I'm going to go back and tell these people you sent me. Well, they're going to ask me these things. Well, you tell them, I will be what I will be. I am that I am. And here are the signs that you mentioned. Of course, when he gets to Pharaoh's court, what happens? And he throws the staff down and it becomes a serpent. Well, Pharaoh's magicians, they just kind of duplicate that, with the exception that Moses' staff, serpent, swallowed theirs up. But those were actually, I think, beyond just demonstrating to Pharaoh. They were to demonstrate to the children of Israel that the God of our fathers has sent, And here's where I'm going with this. When Moses first goes in to speak to Pharaoh, when Moses and Aaron go in, because Aaron goes in because, Moses said, I'm slow of speech, I stutter and all this kind of stuff. Oh, well, no excuse. We'll just send Aaron in with you. All right? And so Aaron goes in with him, and they make this big presentation to Pharaoh. They throw the rod down. It becomes a serpent, all those things. The magicians duplicate that. And then that's when Pharaoh says, you know what? You got too much time on your hands. You're idle. So I'm going to double the work. You're going to have to go out, make the same tally of bricks, but you're going to have to fetch your own straw. So things didn't go the way I would have expected them to go if I'd been Moses. I would thought, we're going to throw this rod down. It's going to become a serpent. They're going to freak out. I'm going to say, let my people go. We're out of here. Even though he's already been told that's not the way it's going to go down. Right? So when he comes out, there are elders of Israel waiting outside. Now, what are they waiting outside expecting to hear? We're free. We're leaving. We're out of here. And what do they find out? No, actually, we're going to have to make the same amount of bricks, but now we've got to fetch our own straw. Read the text. It says, and I'm paraphrasing, that you have put a sword in Pharaoh's hand to kill us. So we're mad at you. We're not mad at Pharaoh. We're afraid of Pharaoh. We're mad at you. All right? So it could be said then that they were more fearful of Pharaoh, who was regarded as a god in Egypt, than they were the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I said all that to say, some of those things were not just for Pharaoh's benefit. I would even say, well, most everything was not just for Pharaoh's benefit. It was for his, the Egyptians, and Israel. Because, and we'll get into this a little bit next week, by and large, Israel knew about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they didn't really know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we could probably, to some degree, at least initially, kind of include Moses in that. That's what that whole encounter at the burning bush is, part of. I'm going to introduce you. I'm going to introduce myself to you. In regard to the leprosy and Miriam, the only other person that I can recall anyway that was struck with leprosy but then healed of it is Miriam and Naaman the prophet. I mean Naaman the Syrian. Until we get over into the Gospels and that particular leper comes to Yeshua and says, if you will it, you could heal me. And then he heals him and sends him on his way. Until then, we have no other record. But going back to Miriam, maybe there was those seeds of doubt. There was some envy, there was some jealousy, and then there was the Lashon Hara, the speaking evil things against the one that the Creator has assigned to this particular position. So the leprosy seems to be, in her case anyway, be careful what you say and who you're speaking against. Because really, when you come against a Moses, for instance, you're not really coming against Moses. You're coming against the one who sent him. You're coming against his purposes. And so that lesson could be received by not only Pharaoh, but that lesson needs to be received by his people too. Because remember what they asked Moses after he went and broke up the fight between the two Hebrews, and this was subsequent to killing that taskmaster. Do you remember what they asked him? Who made you prince among us? Well, there was an answer to that question, actually. He did. But were they ready to receive that yet? No. And so there had to be a transformation in the thinking of God's people too. And this is my main point. There had to be a transformation in their way of thinking, not just the unbelieving Egyptians, but also the unbelieving Israelites too. So if you want to put Miriam as an example of that or representative of that, okay.
I have one more question, and it all has to pertain to what you were saying before. If in the comments of the Jewish commentary was saying that the astrologers saw that there was this one that comes out of the water that would bring down his dynasty. My question is, if Satan doesn't know what is going to happen, how can these astrologers, and you see it like through Daniel, and if you read the extra biblical things like Jasher, you see like they take these things and they know the future, like the wise men, you know. How do they know this if it's not in scripture? How do they know just by looking at stars?
Well, the wise men and the Egyptian astrologers are apples and oranges.
Or
This
what?
is two different things, you know. There is astronomy and there is astrology, and they are not the same thing. You know, one is the study of the stars, the other is trying to divine the future by looking at the stars, okay? One is authentic, one is an imposter, all right? The creator of all things created the stars, and when he put the stars in the heavens, you know, they were, you know, the sun, the moon, and the stars, they served for signs and for seasons, right? The Moedim, they served for Ot, which you could put signs or omens or things like that. And, you know, to tell time, more or less. But where the stars are concerned, one of the things that one function they serve is as Ot, or signs or omens, all right? So there are things that were written in the stars, so to speak, and in the heavens declare your glory. You know, don't want to get too far off track, but perhaps you should check this book out. It's by E.W. Bullinger. It's called The Witness in the Stars. Have you ever heard of it or maybe read it? Check it out. Because what it does is he shows how the gospel message, or the message of the kingdom, was first written in the stars. When you go back and take what's called Mazarot, the constellations, and you go back and look at their names originally in Hebrew, they told a message. They told a message of the gospel. So my point here is that there was a legitimate way to look at these things that the Creator had put in the heavens without divining and without, you know, having to call on gods and involve evil spirits and, you know, get into all this, you know, astrology and all these kinds of things and divination. No, that's not what they were doing. But the Magi, remember, Balaam made a prophecy in Numbers chapter 24 about a star would rise out of Jacob. Remember that? And that was a definite messianic prophecy. All right. So apparently the Creator of all things caused something to happen in the heavens that those who were observant, not divination, not astrology, not all those things, but who were observant, who understood the scriptures, saw something as an omen, as a sign that they connected to that idea. You have to remember, Daniel used to be in Babylon. How did Daniel know that many tekel ufarsin meant you have been weighed in the measures and been found wanting? How did he do that? Well, it's by the Spirit of God. You know, he gave him insight into those things. But there were people who were in Babylon who weren't the Babylonian style astrologer and magician and those kinds of things, but may have learned of these things from people like Daniel. All right. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't believe the adversary and those that he influences predicts the future. You know, there's one who says that from the beginning he's told us the end. And he does nothing except he first reveal his secret unto his servants, the prophets. How does he do this? It's by his Spirit, right? You agree with that? Mm-hmm. So can he, by his Spirit, impress upon me something that I speak to you and you receive that as a word of knowledge? I can, by the Spirit, say something to you that resonates within you that I would have no way of knowing. Now, if that happens and it's legitimate, how did it happen? By divination and some black art? Or did it happen by the Spirit of God? All right? Go back to Pharaoh's courtroom. He throws the rod down. Moses throws the rod down. It becomes a serpent. What did the magicians of Egypt do?
Exactly the same.
They did the same thing. It was an imposter. You know, it was trying to replicate these things, but how were they doing it? By these black arts and divination and all this occultic stuff. What happened? The rod of Aaron did what? Devoured the other, because that doesn't have any power over what God is doing. I hope I'm making sense here. We have to make sure the adversary has power, but he's not all powerful. You know, he has influence, but only with those who allow him that influence. He is going to have someone who works for him at the end of days called the false prophet, who's going to commission this building of an image that, according to what the book of Revelation says, he causes it to both speak and live. All right, now, how does he do that? Because he has authentic creative power? No. It's because he's an illusionist. And he can make things appear to be something like God, but they aren't really God. You know, he's not all powerful. You know? I don't know the mechanics of it. But I guess if we're going to take anything away from this, is that we've got to be very, very careful to be genuinely guided by the Spirit of God and to walk in the parameters that are established by the Word of God. And this is one of the reasons he cautions his people not to give in to those things, not to listen to those who do those things. Don't pay them any attention, because it's very seductive. You know, it's very alluring. It's very intriguing. So much so that it can appear sometimes that what is really the adversary might, to some, they might consider, oh, this looks like God. You know, that's how he is going to deceive, by lying signs and wonders. And if they are lying signs and wonders, that means they're not real. They're not true. Okay? So I've rambled on, but I guess the biggest thing here is we need to understand that, yes, the adversary has power, but he's not all powerful.
Is he out time and space? You know how God is outside of time and space. Is Satan outside of time and space too?
He's a created being.
But is he?
I don't
he's
know.
not-
I don't know.
No.
I don't know. There are some things I have to say I don't know. This is one of them, you know. But he's a created being. That means he is not all powerful. Most of the power he wields is what we allow him to do. You know, if he could destroy you and me outright, don't you think he would have already done it? That's what he's tried to do to Israel throughout its history, right? Tried to find a way to destroy them. By hook or crook, he's tried to find a way to destroy them. But what has happened each and every time? He's failed, right? Why? Because he's not all powerful. Let me say one other thing here, and then we'll go to the next question, which I am going to go take that one that was on. That I can't pass that one up. The power that the adversary wields in our lives is when we reject what the Creator has told us. Is there something wrong? The Mac crashed.
Yeah, it's coming up now. She's got it. Speaking of power.
Speaking of power, okay. So does that mean I need to? Okay, I'm just going to keep talking. Okay, all right, that's not a problem. You go back to the sin of Baal Peor, okay? When Balaam has gone to curse Israel 3 times, but he can't curse them, right? Why? Because God's blessed them. And he can't overturn that. He cannot undo that. And so the adversary does not have the power that we, unfortunately, oftentimes give him. He doesn't. He's limited in his power. Now, he does a really good job, unfortunately, of making everybody think that he's got all of this power, you know, and he tries to make people think through things like astrologers that he has the power to predict what's going to happen in the future, but no, I don't think he does. So maybe that's the answer to your question. Is he limited by time and space? Maybe not in the same way you and I are, but he's certainly limited, right? So the only time that his power is effective is when we allow it to be. And when we let our guard down and we walk outside the boundaries the Creator has established for us. And when Balaam goes to Balak and says, look, you know, I can't curse them, but what we could do is that we could seduce them with the beautiful daughters of Midian and Moab. And if we can seduce the men to come over here to a sacrificial meal and bow down to the Baal of Peor, then they'll end up doing to themselves what we don't have the power to do to them outright. That's where the adversary wields his power, is when we give it to him and we give him access. So let's be very, very careful not to give him any credit. You know, let's not give him more power than he actually has, to buy into the idea that he can upend our lives if he wants to, but because he can't. He can only do what we allow him to do. If we are his people, if we're walking in obedience, then we have certain promises that the adversary cannot overturn. He can only have access to our lives when we decide to do what's right in our own eyes and we get outside that boundary. So when we get into things like astrology and those kinds of things, obviously that's way outside the boundary. But let's don't even get close to it. Let's don't even see how close we can get to those kinds of things. And by that I mean, let's don't consider that the adversary has this power he doesn't possess. All right, I've rambled on. There was a question, and I have to, okay. All right. The question what? That we're online? Well, there was one that I can't resist. Is it written down here? Yeah. Oh, yes, here it is. Is there a greater exodus coming out of Kala, Egypt? Kala, Egypt. We've got, 2 families that I know of in our congregation. 4? You were originally California, and then you ended up in Arizona, and so you just been, okay, I got you. So, yeah, so no, we'll have 5 families just in our little congregation that come from California. Oh, well, I have to tell you something after the live stream's over, but anyway. All right, so, okay, the one about Exodus 4 we've already addressed. Being in the end times, how do you see the tribulation and what our role will be? Some teach that we will escape in groups during the tribulation. What are your thoughts on that? If the question is, what are my thoughts on the tribulation? Well, there's going to be one. I usually, when I get a question like this, I will assume, and maybe I shouldn't do that, but I will assume that what they mean is, do we go through it? Do we escape it? My opinion is that if we are part of Israel, Israel's here during all of that stuff, and we go through it, we endure it, we overcome it. How do we overcome it? By the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony, and because they love not their lives even unto death. As it relates to escaping in groups, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I know that I've heard different things. So some go by the sword, some go into captivity, some are, escape all of that. You know what? I think it's to our benefit just to keep our eyes on the author and the finisher of our faith, so that whatever we're going through, we can overcome it and we can endure it. And if it's the great tribulation happening all around us, if I keep my eyes on him, then, and if I fulfill his purpose for my life, once I have served my purpose, what happens after that is all in his hands anyway. So I just have to leave it at that. We've got another Zipporah circumcision question. We've already actually, there's more Zipporah circumcision questions than anything here. That's, in my mind's eye, when she's getting mad at him and upset about him, I mean, no, I shouldn't make any comedy about that. I just see the typical scene. The husband is just going through life, and the wife is the one who's got a real grip on reality, and like, dude, get your act together, and she has to bring him to his. Now, that's how I see it. But, I don't know. There's probably a lot of other things in that. I do that all too well. The doot thing. In more ways than you can imagine. Isn't the goal of circumcision a new creation? In other words, a new type of Christianity. That last part, you lost me on that. But is the goal of circumcision a new creation? Well, I think the goal of circumcision, according to what I understand in the book of Genesis in chapter 17, it is a mark and a sign of the covenant. And as a sign of the covenant, it's between us and between him. Where the males are concerned, this has to do with the seed, okay? Because if you don't have the seed, you can't have the fruit. So in that respect, yeah, I can see that it connects to the idea of being a new creation, passing through the covenant, so to speak. As far as a new type of Christianity, I'm not even really sure what that means, because we're part of a family called Israel. And circumcision was given to Israel as a sign of the covenant. And, I do believe that there are those who are circumcised in the flesh, but not of the heart. And that circumcision of the flesh does not guarantee them entrance into the kingdom. And vice versa, as Paul talks about, there are those who are circumcised in the heart, not circumcised in the flesh, but that circumcision of the heart accounts for that circumcision of the flesh, because they're going to produce the fruit of that covenant. But it is a sign of the covenant. And by the way, I'm not saying that people who haven't been circumcised, if they so feel led, that they, I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. That's between them and the Father. I'm just saying that circumcision of the heart, even Moses talks about that. He says you need to be circumcised in your heart. You need to be, their heart needs to be softened up. So it is, if you want to relate coming into the covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as becoming a new creation, then yes, I would say in that respect, it is a sign of that. But I don't see it as being a new type of anything. It is something that goes way back to the very beginning. Yes. Microphone. Beth.
And this is just me, but I've had similar questions in the past, and it's hard for me to follow the thought process of something that came after a covenant. That older covenant being a new form of what came out of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't process for me.
Right. That's why I say I don't think it's a new type of anything. It is the Creator is consistent. He doesn't go off on some tangent over here, and so that we have to form a new kind of theology and go around our elbow to get to our nose. He's consistent. But consider this, and Paul talks about how that Abraham was called when he was uncircumcised. He believed when he was uncircumcised. So that circumcision was just a sign, and even not even an outward sign. That's something of a personal nature. Abraham's not going to go displaying his sign everywhere. So, but he knew, right? Hold on. This is important. No, this is important. Say it.
The only thing that keeps you out of is the Seder meal. And nobody's checking on your way in.
That's right. I had people ask me last year, so how are you going to deal with having the Pesach and the Seder and knowing who's circumcised and what? And I said, well, I'll designate you as circumcision inspector, because I'm not doing it. Oh, boy. Lord, I apologize. You have something? All right, you and then Dana wants to ask something.
Okay, I don't know if this was announced earlier, but totally unrelated to anything you're talking about here. Today is Robert and Nayla's 35th wedding anniversary.
Please give her condolences.
Robert says give her condolences. She's not in here. She's teaching the younger ones. But anyway, I want to make sure we got that out there. And then speaking of our children, I am just so blessed, and I wanted to share a couple of things that happened since we met at the morning service. You all heard about the young lady who was one of our teens who sent the dream to me this week, yesterday or the day before, that she had, very prophetic, and the scripture that you and I both had, that we both got separately, same scripture. And then while we were eating at lunch just now, I had the pleasure of sitting with a family whose 2 children are in a Christian school in the Knoxville area, and they were telling me their story, and what a blessing it was to hear it, because they have been so well accepted there. The school, knowing that they walk the way we do, that the holidays are going to be different, the meals, different things that are going to be setting them apart. But they have made this family feel very welcome, and this family has been such a light, and especially these children there being in the school every day have been such a light that now the kids have presented it in such a way to the rest of the school that now everybody else is wanting to find out more. The school is asking the parents to come and teach about this. Some of the kids, one of the young men was so interested that he started studying it himself just based on what his little friend, and these are middle school, and I think the other one is in elementary school, or he might be middle school. Anyway, one of the friends or classmates got so interested, he started studying about it. They invited him to a Seder that they had. He came, he brought his family, he's wearing, tzitzit, he's studying, he's answering all the questions. And the kids are at the school, they're, leading the adults partially. It's not, I don't want to say that in the wrong way, but the adults are very open and accepting, and so that's not always the case, and that's a huge blessing, and these children are the ones who are ushering this in. You were going to say something?
I was going to use the word inspiring the adults.
Inspiring, there we go, that's a good word. And so then, while I'm in the middle of this beautiful conversation with this amazing family, one of our even younger ones comes up and hands me this precious card. And in light of events of this week, we all had some incredibly sad news with the Goods. Last week, we had some very sad news with one of Bill's childhood friends. And I know that several people have just kind of had the question in their mind or even verbalized it, where are our miracles? And it would be easy to be down. And this little girl handed me this card, and I would say she's probably 6 or 7 years old, one of our little ones here. And this is what she's written in the card. Here is what I am commanding you to do. Be strong and brave. Do not lose hope. I am the Lord your God. I will be with you everywhere you go. Joshua 1:9. She said, Dear Miss Beth and Mr. Bill, I pray that you stay strong and healthy. And the verse that was written in the card that she chose to write all of this in, which I just read, is what she wrote. And then the card that was pre-written is, For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future, from Jeremiah 29:11. She's drawn a beautiful tree that's very fruitful. And so I'm thinking of how we as adults have felt this week, getting some of the news we've gotten, whether it's health in our own family, health of friends, or devastating health of others, or, circumstances of others. And our children remain joyful, and they bring us joy, and they're doing these things that the scripture tells us they're going to do. And so we have 3 examples of all 3 age groups of those who can actually articulate what the Lord is putting in their heart. And in my heart, I know he has spoken through all 3 of these situations. So how blessed are we? Amen. I just wanted to share that. How could she know, except by the Spirit of God, that we, as a family, as the adults here, we needed to hear this scripture now. Don't lose hope.
Well, that goes back to what Messiah said. You have to come into this kingdom as a little child, which, children, generally speaking, ideally, their love is endless. their faith is not bound. Their trust is, infinite in those people that their parents, those people that they love and trust. And so the same should be said of us where our Father is concerned. It's, this whole adult thing, sometimes gets in the way. But so it is encouraging. It's inspiring to have young ones come and say something like that. By the way, I read it too. To say things like that and just to remind you that that the Father's heart is that we would be that way toward Him and toward one another, that we'd have that kind of consideration for one another. Yes, Dana?
To kind of follow that, I was so encouraged by the Torah portion today because I could just feel the Holy Spirit quickening and preparing us for what's to come. And I think we all know we're right there in that place where any day we're expecting something to happen and we don't know what it is or how it's going to happen, but we just know. And I was thinking a lot about 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where he says, "But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us." And even though we're not there yet, it says, we are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying about in the body of the dying of the Messiah, and the life of Yeshua also may be manifested in us. And then in verse 16, this is the part, he says, "Therefore we do not lose heart, even though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a glory that far outweighs it all." And I guess just in lieu of these, there are so many challenges and there are so many people around us that are hurting. And even this week I was with family and it was a testimony to the Lord because generally that's a very challenging place to be. And I had moments.
Family? Yes, I'm acquainted with that. Yes.
Yeah. And I had moments that I just had to remove myself and just, like Joseph, I felt like I just had to remove myself from compassion that was welling up in me for even these people that come against us. Like, they have no idea what they're doing. And it was a really difficult, I made a trip to Texas and it was very difficult, but not for the reasons that I thought it would be. I thought it would be, the things that were coming against me. Instead, it was that my heart was broken for these people that I love so dearly, and they can't see Messiah for who he is. And so I just believe that, so everything you said today about how the afflictions that come, it goes back to what you were talking about last week, about the fruit that gets produced, because then when they squeeze us and love comes out, hopefully that's the thing that's going to grab a hold of their hearts. So I'm just grateful to be a part of this congregation because I feel like that's why the Father has placed us here in this region collectively, to be able to love this community that is hurting, So I'm just grateful.
Well, you said something there that, I think I want to make sure everybody catches this or sees this. You had to remove yourself, you said, because of the compassion you were feeling, and Messiah's standard is that he prays, "Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing." That's his heart. He's being afflicted, he's being abused, and all these different things. But his heart is, as he's being squeezed, "Father, forgive them because they don't really understand what they're doing." I'm not there yet, but I understand that that's where I need to get. That when these things come our way, doesn't mean that we condone, endorse, enable. It just means that we have compassion on them because that's the standard. If we're being squeezed by these things and venom is coming out, well, that that means there's some work still to be done in our lives, because the squeezing is going to get harder as we go farther down the road here. The oppression is going to become more intense, and how are we going to respond to that? So it's almost like he's starting us on a workout routine, and he's allowing things to be said, to be done, to see how we're going to respond. We don't respond the way we know we're supposed to, well, then we need to kind of keep working in that routine until what's coming out is not venom, but it's compassion, it's love, it's consideration of things. And again, that does not mean that I agree with, condone, enable, endorse what they're doing. It just means I don't respond in a way that typically I would have. But so thank you for sharing that. Yes, Dale?
My question is kind of twofold. Exodus chapter 5, at the beginning, the first couple of verses, it talks about Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and basically said, "Let my people go so that they may hold a feast unto me." And then it goes down to say that they wanted to go out for a 3 days journey into the desert to sacrifice. And I was just curious what your take is on that, as in, was the plan, it sounds almost like the original plan wasn't to leave.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, actually, because this is something that's always intrigued me. That's exactly what they didn't go in and say, "Let my people go to the land of Canaan." Never, you can't find that he says that. Now, Creator has already told Moses at Horeb, at the burning bush, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. You're going to tell Pharaoh to let my son go, but he's not going to go along with it. He's going to resist, and then eventually it's going to mean the death of his son. But he will eventually let you go. But when Moses and Aaron go in, as it's recorded here, "Let my people go 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may keep a feast unto the Lord." So here's why I find that intriguing. Later on, when Pharaoh does relent, and he says to Moses, he says, "All right, go as you have said. Do what you said to do." Never did Moses say, "We're going to go back to Canaan." Pharaoh's still operating on the premise that, okay, you're going to go out and you're going to keep a feast. Remember, there had been, okay, I'll let you go, but you got to keep your children here. No, we're all going. I'll let you go, but you have to leave all your herds and your flocks here. No, every hoof needs to go. All right. So there seems to be something building, and this is Bill's take on it anyway, okay? There seems to be something building where Pharaoh is suspicious that they're not just going to go 3 days journey into the wilderness, but they're going to go beyond that, okay? Although, from what I can read, Moses never says that. Now, why? Is Moses, God, being deceitful? No. They did go in, they went into the wilderness, and they ended up keeping a feast. It's just that the Creator's never going to give the adversary all the information. Our God is a good general. And so he's setting a trap. He's not lying, but he's setting a trap. Why? Because you see, Pharaoh owns Israel. In his mind, anyway, he owns them. They are his slaves. So what has to happen? Pharaoh's got to go. Right? Because as long as he's there, he will lay claim to the Hebrews. So the Creator is setting a trap. Now, some people might have a problem with that. That sounds a little shrewd, and, hey, he's a good general. So as this is building, it seems that Pharaoh is like suspicious. If I let you go, are you coming back? I'm going to keep your children. I'm going to keep your flocks and all these kinds of things. So then when he finally says, okay, go as you have said, he's still working on the premise that you're going to go 3 days journey into the wilderness. All right. So what prompts him to pursue them? What happened? That maybe, or it could be something else. Because before Joseph had died, and who was Joseph as far as Egypt was concerned? He's the guy that saved this country, right? So when he was buried, what's the chance that they dug a hole and pitched him in the dirt? Or being who he was placed in some elaborate tomb somewhere. So what happens if word gets back to Pharaoh that, hey, Joseph's tomb is empty. Because he had said, don't leave my bones in Egypt. Something happened that triggered Pharaoh to go from letting them go to pursuing them. All right? Because, like I said, I'm of the opinion he's still working on the premise it's 3 days' journey into the wilderness, but then something happened to let him know that they're not intending to come back. And I argue that it's when he found out that Joseph's tomb was empty. So now if you see Pharaoh as the adversary and the Hebrews as God's people, and we've been in bondage to the adversary, what tipped him off that we're not intending to come back into his camp? Because the tomb is empty, right? Because the tomb is empty, and when he came forth from the tomb, Yeshua was holding the keys of death and hell in his hand. It has no power over him. And because we are in him, that has no power over us either. All right? So Pharaoh pursues, and back to the trap part. You know, in the movie, Yul Brynner stands back, and, you know, he's in his chariot, you know, and he's watching everybody else go forward, you know, and he's just watching all this happen. But that's not what the Bible says, is it? Pharaoh was destroyed in that. And so when those waters washed over Pharaoh and his chariots, nobody could lay claim to God's people. Nobody could say they belong to me. And that's why he said, I called my son out of Egypt. So, anyway. Okay. Anyone else want to share, have a comment, want a question? Yes? All right, somebody online? Okay.
Okay, Carolinda asks the exact same question that somebody just asked me at lunch today. When are you going to take us to Israel? We have one family who is already saving because they want to be ready as soon as you say the word.
As soon as the Father tells me to go.
Fair enough. Wouldn't want to go without him.
All right. He's just going to have to make that very clear that that's what he wants us to do. I have said, I've said it to folks here, I'll say it, you know, for the folks out there. I am not really all that interested in just doing the tour to Israel anymore. I've done that. I could be compelled to go and to take family. You know, understand what I'm saying? All right? And that we go, you know, as a family. If we can do that, and that's the Father's will, then if it's his will, then there's going to be a great purpose coming out of it. And so he's just going to have to kind of lead and direct me in that. I'm not trying to, you know, be flippant about it. That's just kind of where I'm at these days. You know, we used to take the tours, and a tour to Israel changed my life, and consequently it changed her life, and it's changed, to some degree, it's changed a lot of other people's lives, you know. And I'm all for going to the land, and I'm all for, you know, having that experience, and I think everyone, if it's at all possible, should experience that at least once in their life, you know. But for me, and what I feel like it's important, you know, what Beth and I are supposed to be doing at this point in time, leading tours to Israel is not one of them. That being said, if as a family we can go, then I'd be open to that.
Can I interject something here?
You can.
May
When have I
please?
ever told you can't say something?
I won't answer that. No.
I will. Never. Never. Okay, go ahead.
And I've just received strong cautions before which I may or may not have regarded. We won't go there. Anyway. Yeah, you don't say anything either right now. Moving right along. Moving right along. So regarding the Israel trip, I was actually told just today that we have a family who would, if we should feel led to extend our trip, would love to personally guide us through Poland, especially Krakow and Auschwitz. They have been there. She's from the area. So they said it would be very worthwhile to extend our trip over there. And it's actually incredibly safe. That they have very rigid immigration rules. So the things you would think you would have to worry about in other countries, you don't have to worry about there.
Well,
Just to sweeten the pot a little bit.
it sounds like you might be pushing for this. So
I want the Father's will, but you know I'm always ready to go on an adventure.
this is true. This is true. She used to want to jump out of airplanes. Anyway, it's 10 till 5. I'm worn out. Just being honest. But I feel like that somebody has something they can share with us to kind of end this on a positive note, an uplifting and encouraging note. And whoever that is needs to step forward here. Something on your heart anybody would like to say? Don't be bashful. Well, did I just totally miss that then? Nate? Okay, come on, Nate.
Just some of the things that were going through my mind about how the enemy can't do anything to us without us giving him permission. And I was thinking about this whole mark of the beast thing that everybody's so worried about, and they're going to force it on us and do all these things. There's not a thing that it cannot be taken forcibly. And that our Father in his love and his compassion will not force himself upon us either. And that during this time, we may think that we need to see miracles in order to get from where we're going, but part of the greater exodus for me is that during that time, during the exodus of Moses, all these miracles and all these wonderful things he was doing was to convince them of who they were. And for us, we have a Messiah. I don't need to be convinced. It's great if we have miracles. It's wonderful. But I don't need to be convinced any longer. I've seen enough. I've heard enough. I've got good teachers. We've got family. We got other brothers and sisters coming from around the world for unknown reasons to a land called the Gathering Place. And that just encourages me and encourages my family. And I hope it encourages you too, that the greater exodus may already be in process. And we may be going through it. The adversary would use that as an excuse against us to say, they're only doing that because you're showing miracles. They're only doing that because you're raising the dead and you're doing it. That's the only reason why they're following you. But for us, we don't have that against us if we walk in the faith and the fullness of what we really believe. Do we believe in what we believe in? Do we believe in a risen Messiah? Do we believe everything that's within those pages? Just for who our Creator is, just our very existence should be enough for us to say, I believe and I don't need all that.
Dainu. All right. So I didn't miss it. You had it. Let's all stand. Let's all stand. Daniel? I want you to pray, and I want you to pray the Father to seal what he's done here today and just to pray for his people. All right, hold that mic close to your mouth.
Father, we thank you for this wonderful day and the wonderful teaching and all the really great questions. We ask that you bless us with knowledge and understanding, and we ask that you watch over your people, take us home safely, and the things that are coming, prepare us as you are. And we love you and we thank you. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen. An early Shavua Tov, everyone. Blessings. Be safe going home. Stay warm. It's going to start getting cold. And we want to say thank you for joining us. For all you people who are on the live stream, thank you for joining us. For those who want to do it Tuesday night, we're starting back with Hebrew. Wednesday night, we'll be back here for Bible study and 6 o'clock for our community meal. And if you want to know what you need to bring, go to the website. Is that the way it works? jacobstent.org. Scroll down to Jacob's Table, and you can see what Nayla has organized there. So blessings, everybody.